Need computer training for a group or office? Contact us today to get a free demo of our training at www.teachucomp.com/enterprise-licensing.
What we see here is the initial screen when you open the Photoshop application. If you're used to a typical Windows environment, you'll see some familiar tools available to you. Let's take a moment to acquaint ourselves with the various parts of the software environment and what we can do through those objects. At the top of the program window, we have what's called the menu bar. It has all the various commands that we'll be looking at throughout the course. At the far right, in the upper right-hand corner, we have our three buttons that control the size and shape of the application window. We have minimize, maximize and restore, and of course the X, which is close. Now note that when you click those buttons that it controls the sizing of the entire application and not just the file upon which you happen to be working. So if we click minimize, it's going to minimize the entire Photoshop application. We can then go down into the taskbar and maximize it by giving it a click. If you're using a version of CS3 or earlier, and if you have the image window maximized with an image opened, then you'll see various information related to the image. What you'll see is the name of the image, its percent magnification, its layer name, and the color model, RGB, CMYK, etc. In versions CS4 and later, that information is displayed in what's called the Image tab, which is located right here just below the options bar. Now the menu bar that we talked about contains the commands for performing tasks in Photoshop grouped by category. For example, the File command contains all of the necessary commands for file management. You can click on one of the commands in the menu bar, as I have done, to display a drop-down listing of the subcommands that are available to perform. You then click on the command that you want to perform. Now, some subcommands are followed by a right-pointing arrow, and that indicates that you must make a selection to execute that command. Those commands you simply hold your mouse pointer over until you see the side menu appear. Then you slide your mouse pointer into the side menu to click on one of the available command choices. Some commands are followed by an ellipsis mark, for example, open, and those commands will then launch a dialog box when clicked into, which you must input additional information or make a selection before you can execute that command. For example, if you selected File and then Open from the menu bar, you'll be presented with the Open dialog box that we see here, where you would need to find a file for editing. Now, in the dialog boxes that do appear, you can click the Cancel button, or you can simply hit Escape on your keyboard to cancel that window without making a choice if you don't want to. If you're interested in simply becoming a faster user of the Photoshop program, then it will help you to memorize some of the keyboard shortcuts that are available for the various commands in the menu bar. Using the menu bar to begin with will allow you to view the various keyboard shortcuts and learn them. Keyboard shortcuts are listed to the right of the various commands in the menu bar drop-down menus. So let's take a look at this. For example, if I go back to File, you'll see the various commands, and to the right of them you'll see their keyboard shortcuts. So if I wanted to view the Open dialog box again, I could press the Control key and then tap the O key on my keyboard to make it appear more quickly in the future. So we'll click out of here, Control O, and you'll see that that opens the Open dialog box again. And so I can go ahead and click Cancel to cancel that command. Now, if you want to use the keyboard to select a command that doesn't have its own keyboard shortcut listed, you still can. If you hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, as I am doing right now, you should notice a small underline appear underneath one letter in each menu bar command. If you press the key on your keyboard that corresponds to the underlying letter of the command from which you want to access a command, you'll see the drop-down menu. So I'm going to hold that down, for example, and click File, and it'll open up all the subcommands here. And then what you'll also see is that each subcommand, with a few exceptions, has an underlined letter. So you can just strike the underlined letter to execute that command. So for example, O again, I can click O and get the open dialog box. Go ahead and cancel that again. Hold down Alt and select File again. Now note that some of the commands under the filter command don't have underlined letters. So let's look at that. A lot of these under File do. And if we click on Edit, some of those do. But filter in particular, we don't see any. Now in that case, you can just press the first letter of the command. And if there is more than one command that starts with the same letter, in the menu dropdown, you just keep pressing the letter to cycle between all of the commands that start with that letter until the one that you want is selected. And then you just press Enter on your keyboard to execute that command. Go ahead and click out of here. Below the menu bar, we have what's called the Options bar. That's located right here, all along the top of the application, just below the menu bar. And it's here where you can set the options for the tools that you select to use from the toolbox. So as a result, this toolbar is constantly changing, showing different buttons and settings depending on what tool is selected. So as we learn how to use these tools, you need to check here to set additional options for the selected tools. You can turn the options bar on and off if you really want to, by selecting Window and then Options from the menu bar to turn it off, or Window and Options to turn it back on. I recommend keeping it on because you use it so frequently, unless it's just really in the way and you're working on something specific in a large image, for example. Below the Options bar, we have the main workspace of the Photoshop program located right here. And the various images that you open and create will display themselves here in their own window. Now you can also use the various toolbars and panels to edit the images. The main tool that we have to select image editing tools is called the Toolbox. It's located right over here. And this is a floating toolbar that hovers over the workspace at the left by default. You can use it to select the tools that assist you in selecting and editing images. You can click on a Toolbox button to activate the selected tool. Like that. Now, some of the buttons on the Toolbox also have small triangles in their lower right corners that you can click to show other available settings for that button in a side menu. You can then click on one of these other button settings to select that as the default choice for that button in the future. You can also display the other settings for a button by simply right-clicking on a button as well. It does the same thing. You can also hold your mouse pointer over any one of the buttons to view its name in a screen tip, which is the small yellow box that appears. So let's look at that. We'll click out of there for a second, and if you hover your mouse over there, we see Move Tool, Elliptical, Marquee Tool, and so forth. So it's a little helpful tip to find the various tools since there's so many in the toolbox. Now note that it will also show the keyboard shortcut so that you can also press that to select the toolbox options if you like. And to do that, you hold down the Shift key on your keyboard while pressing one of those keyboard shortcuts, and you'll switch to that tool. So, for example, we have L. If I hold down Shift and then L, it's going to select that tool for me. Another way to do a shortcut. If you tap those same keys again, you'll switch to the next tool that shares that same space or that same button. If you want to move the toolbox, then you place your mouse pointer over the small title bar at the top of the toolbox right here, and then you just click and drag and release wherever you want to place it. Now, you may have to do this quite a bit as you're working with your images. Just it kind of depends on what you're working with, but it's kind of helpful sometimes to have the toolbox a little closer to where you're working. Makes it really handy to be able to customize your workspace. Now, you can also expand and collapse the toolbox by clicking the double pointing arrows at the top of the toolbox. Right here, right next to the X, you'll see that can expand and collapse it. And this can also come in handy when working in different workspaces, so it just makes it a little bit more flexible. You can turn the toolbox on and off by selecting Window and then Tools from the menu bar, and of course turning it back on. This is really something that I recommend you leave turned on. You'll be using these tools quite frequently in editing your images, so unless you really need that space that it's taking up, you should probably leave it turned on. But it is a toggle, meaning that you can turn it on or off by following the same commands. And that is our Photoshop environment. In the next few lessons, we'll be talking about some of the other pieces and parts of the environment, including the panels and the panel well, and also how to create custom workspaces.
Like what you see? Get a free demo of our training for groups of 5 or more at www.teachucomp.com/enterprise-licensing.